So so this class. So last time we talked about the high levels of what a risk deal is. What are the basic? Why do we do it? What are the basic terms that we negotiate, etc. I want to take a few more, and we got through, I'd say, 1.5 cases, and so I just want to go through, let's say, 3.5 cases, finish the one that we're on, and add 3 more, which I think will hopefully be add some other angles to the risk deal discussion. Sound good? Okay, so let's keep going. So we went through a risk deal, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff was to sign off cases, and we did the first one, and then let's go to the second one. So let's go. Sam, were you here last time? I forget. Yeah. So where, and remind me sort of where we left off on this one. Like what was your summary of this as you thought about it? Remember this case? So this was a provider gives us 2 options: either stand pat with our fee-for-service deal, or add in a risk deal with a $4 care coordination fee with $50 upside and downside at an 88 MLR. And so just give me your summary and your thinking on how you thought about this deal.
So just thinking about the options. So we're already automatically going to give them $4 per member per month for care coordination fee. Mm-hmm. The 50-50 upside downside risk. There's the risk. Two options. There's more. I'm blanking right now.
Let's see. Joan, what do you think?
So I think 88% is usually higher than we think the initial target for MLR we get going into the market would be. And $4 seems like a lot, but then they're taking on some downside risk off of that, which is sort of unique here. I think we talked a little bit about how remotivation, if the provider's going to offer to take a risk deal with us going into the new market, might be a better longer-term partner. But based on sort of assessing the market, I would think it's doing nothing off of that and taking the math off of a standard deal and then considering the option, how options compare.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. Just if I want to isolate the expected value versus sort of like changing our risk profile. From an expected value, who thinks that A is better for us? Who thinks that B is better for us? All right. All right, Coral. Well,
in San Antonio, for example, B is going to turn out to be a really great option for us. But it's just, to your point on expected value, it's just what is that 88% really mean? It can mean different things. Not mean, but
yeah. What do you have to think? What do you have to think for B? What do you have to believe for B to be in our best interest?
What do we have to believe? That we will hit an MLR higher than 88%.
What if it's 88? What if it's 89?
There's so much to pay the care coordination fee outright. So you're basically like a sunk cost immediately that you're already going to pay whatever the care coordination fee is, and then assume are you actually going to hit an 88% MLR on top of that. So you may win, you may lose, but you're basically like net negative from off the bat because you have to pay this care coordination fee.
Right. So. Okay, so, and how much is $4 PMPM in premium terms? 1%. Right, it's about 1%. So you're paying 1%. And to get a 50-50 risk deal, So let's just separate the two things. So this is just minus 1% premium in the whole, right? So that's that. And then that means this thing, 50/50 upside, has to pay you 1% for it to offset the payment that you're here. And so what MLR gets you is very simple math, but really, what MLR gets you 1% in that back half?
91.
91. I guess 91 is the right answer. Is that right? It depends which terms if you add in the 1% or not or whatever. But anyway, but basically 90 is the simple answer. In that if you have an MLR of 90, you're 2 points over the 88%. You split those 2 points, and you get 1 back. Right? In other words, if you're at 90, you split whatever above 88. That's 2 points, but you split it, so 50% of 2% is 1%, right? And so if you thought the MLR, if our best guess was 90, you would be equivalent between A and B, basically. There's a minor thing in here. Anyway, that's pretty much right. If you may define the MLR in a contract as including the care coordination fee or not, and that's how Sarah Alice's answer could technically be right. But anyway, that's not the biggest deal for right now. Do people get? Does that make sense?
That's good.
Yeah.
Minor question on the 4% being 1% premium. What's your denominator?
It's just roughly our average premium ends up being about $400 per PMPM. It depends by market, particularly percent catastrophic is the biggest thing. Catastrophic in bronze versus gold platinum. But silver and it's different markets are different or whatever, but that's a simple rule of thumb of $400 per PMPM. And obviously as premiums go up 10-12% per year, that'll change a little bit. But anyway, that's about right.
Is that what care coordination fees are typically, like how do we land that typically for care coordination fees? Is that 4 versus 15 versus?
The market is somewhere between 0.5% and 1.5% is typically what you pay for such things. Maybe more towards the bottom of that spectrum, like a couple bucks. PMPM is more typical, and then we pay tenant $4.75. Those are about our range. So now, so now let's say we thought the MLR was going. Your best guess was 92%. Should you do this deal? Nishi, what do you think?
Yes, because then you'd be splitting 4% to get back to.
Mm-hmm. No, who agrees with Nishi? Who disagrees? Okay, good. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we talked about the relationship standpoint of like setting up a partner to fail in the last session.
Mhm.
Like, I think if we know that we're gonna if they're gonna fail in this risk deal, like that might not be good for us in the long term with like maintaining a relationship.
Yeah, so that's a good point and something to think through. Actually, very valid and good point, which is particularly if we know for sure something is going to be higher than 88. Usually, when you put a term in a contract, you don't want to set the other. If you have increased information, you're sort of setting the other party up to fail. It's kind of no bueno, and so you just should be thoughtful about that. I agree. So fair enough. But if you say what's in our financial best interest or something like that in a more immediate sense, I think the answer is just sort of mechanically yes. Now let's say the best guess of the MLR is 88. What should we do? Who does the deal? Who doesn't do the deal?
Do we know anything about what our unit costs are going to be? Like whether we offer this or not?
What do you mean?
Like, do we feel confident that we'll be able to get the lowest unit cost that we want?
Yeah, we already have a deal in place. So now, what about 89? Anybody want to do? Yeah.
There's some small stuff around just the fact that more of our agreements are at risk related to like regulatory capital and behavior incentives, like HEDIS data, all of that. I think there's some pricing to that. If it's truly indifferent, maybe it tips to doing a risk deal.
To that point, like NCQA, make sure that we have something
NCQA,
in every
regulatory
state.
capital changes the game. I think their interest in getting us RAD HEDIS data changes. So I don't know. I can see a world where we say if it's completely indifferent, let's put them at risk.
So let's just say this. Here's a number. Raise your hand if you would do it for. If actuarial told you it was 89.5 is the MLR, just a little bit below. So it's not in your best interest. And they believe that 90 is our break even, as we discussed. Anything below that, we're expected to pay out money. Anything above that, we're expected to gain money. Would anybody do it for less than 90? Raise your hand if you do it at all for less than 90. Raise your hand if you wouldn't do it for less than 90. So Sam, you wouldn't do it for anything less than 90.
No.
Drive a tough bargain.
You're looking at it from an expected value standpoint. Like, you said actuarial policy.
That's actuarial best guess.
I mean,
So,
a little bit more conservative, but yeah.
So what do you think about what Capco's saying about, well, they might change their behaviors and do risk adjustment for us, they might do HEDIS, they might lower their total cost of care, they might do this, that, and the other.
And we also may be able to reduce the amount of money we have to hold regulators ultimately because the statutory capital is calculated differently as a result of it being a risk contract.
Operational costs on our side and getting all of that set up and done and then getting all of that completed and executed well in the first year and with confidence about it.
The fact is I'm actually doing it. I wouldn't be comfortable with that unless they've shown results over the previous 3 or 4 years showing that they've been able to lower their costs through HEDIS or whatever it is. I'm assuming when we go into this whole process and we look at what they've done and we come up with measures consistent. If they can do that, I think that's wonderful. But
Tracy, what do you think?
So I think for some of the things that specifically Capco touched on, I wouldn't do it if we think we're going to hit like an 80% MLR, but I think if we're pretty close to the break even, plus or minus 2 points, for things that we want to do like direct scheduling, for things we want to do like getting HEDIS data pulled, etc., it gives us some cover and gives us a lot more leverage with them. We've seen that with a provider like Sinai, where they won't do anything unless there's something at risk and tied to it that they can point to and say, this isn't our benefit. And then similarly, the regulatory thing is something to think about because in order to get licensed or to maintain our accreditation, it's helpful to have these types of deals in place.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to sort of summarize, I think, the views on how I would think about it, just my 2 cents, and then we can go on to the next one. I think most, except for maybe 1 point, is out there, which is, so on all of these deals, we've got like essentially the expected value that we're paying in or that we're getting, right? And some of the deals at zero, some of the deals we get a benefit, some of the deals they get a benefit, and so that's an important number to always calculate when we do any of these deals, to understand that. And then if we're going to deviate and actually end up paying in and do something that's not in our expected value, we have to be very clear why we are paying that money, and we just will think about it like a payment, right? And then there are reasons why. I think the first is that we believe the MLR will actually be lower because we did this, because we'll do risk adjustment better, because they'll lower the total cost of care or whatever. As Sam is saying, and we talked about previously, just be very thoughtful if we are going to do all that stuff. And if we want anything in particular, such as like scheduling for care routing that is going to lower MLR, we should get it in the contract. And so that we say, okay, you're going to do this, this, and this. If you don't, like you're not getting your care coordination fee, right? So if you think, so one is that it could lower the aggregate MLR and we would thus get the benefit back. The other is if we're required to for some regulatory reason or whatever, although we can usually, without, this is a pretty massive risk deal, we can usually do a much
smaller risk deal if we need to in order to satisfy regulatory requirements. And then the third one, which nobody mentioned, is that it may actually be in our just financial best interest just to lower our risk. And that, so you may say, listen, we're launching a big new market in some place. Let's say we're launching Orlando, big market, we might get a whole bunch of lives. Boy, it would be nice to just be guaranteed that our admin and not run the risk of, as much a risk of a very high MLR leading to a bad financial outcome. Yeah.
I think one fourth one might be in certain scenarios it could be advantageous to take a lower unit cost for ability to price in a market competitively and give it back to the providers in the form of a risk deal.
Yeah, and so we talked about that a little bit this one. This case in particular was, it says in a new market. Fine. But anyway, fair enough. And so that's right. We did that in the last one. I think that's important. And then this was sort of I had in my mind assuming that we already had fee-for-service unit costs agreed to, and this was a later on. But I agree if they say, hey, if A says, like if B also included slightly lower unit costs, then that could tip the scales as well. Yeah.
Inversion, not this class probably, but in a future class, can we talk about how this intersects with their AXA arrangement?
AXA?
Yeah, the AXA arrangement and how we think about that. Not for today, but a future class.
Yeah, AXA I wouldn't think, don't worry about AXA as a huge deal. It's only in a couple markets. I think it's New York individual. And as far as I know, they basically have half of the risk on everything that we do. And so
Post this stuff.
it would be post this stuff, and so then you're half of a half. If you offload the risk, you're then half of a half.
Yeah.
Although there's details in there, right? Because I think if we make them pay more in 1 year, we then have to pay them more the next year. So anyway, I think it's largely a capital relief thing as distinct from a expected value. Anyway, I wouldn't worry too much about AXA. It's a particular transaction that's actually not. If it becomes a huge part of all of our business, then we should do it. But it's not. It's not going to be that huge. Okay. Questions? Good.
One question. When you talk about a risk deal that's almost too favorable for us, not being a great outcome if it ends up screwing over the partner, do you have any thoughts on guardrails around that, or because isn't every risk deal essentially one person loses, one person wins? Yeah.
Well, I want to separate two things. There's do you know going in that you're going to host somebody, as distinct from who ended up being host. So we signed more or less this deal with Tenet. It ended up being a very good deal for us, and but it didn't need to. I more or less made the consideration that third thing of the financial uncertainty in San Antonio was so large that to have 2 years of that was to have this downside was actually a really big win for us at the time because there was so much volatility. You could have said that a little bit. I thought I didn't really trust our actuarial team to be targeting a mid-80s MLR and whatever. It ended up being right, and so there's that though. I feel like we went into it not knowing which way it would go.
Got it.
Then it ended up being massively in our favor. That's totally fine. And if it ends up being massively in our favor, but we went into it with honest intentions, that's more fine. And then, frankly, we just have the leverage on them.
Yeah.
The only other piece and so that's good, and then we can use that for other things. The one thing I would say is another thing to think about is if any deal that may potentially require a large provider system to write us a big check, just note that you should haircut that because it will be a pain in the ass to get from them. Because they'll fight you on it, they'll do these things, whatever, and so just be thoughtful about that.
There'll be time and effort.
Right. It's a minimum time and effort, and maybe okay, well, fine, pay us 80% of it, and let's call it a deal, sort of thing. But anyway, okay.
To add to that, did you want to speak to this? Actually, but we had a JFC with Tenet on Friday, and we had House on the phone, and we're just very upfront about where the MLR standing, so
Where
that can avoid kind of the pushback with the
But we're still probably only 8% of it, I would imagine, is my guess. Okay, next. In Detroit, Together Health tells us that instead of a single gain share risk deal, they'd rather have 3 separate gain share deals with 3 downstream systems, Ascension, Trinity, University of Michigan. Meaning, for folks who don't know, Together Health is sort of an amalgamation, an umbrella organization that sits above Ascension, Trinity, and University of Michigan, and we contract with Together Health, and in so doing get access to those 3 systems. And we have a risk deal currently with this entity, and then instead they want risk, that what this question is saying, what they say, they call us up and say, I know we have this risk deal here, but instead we want to have risk deals with this one, and this one, and it's a gain share. So they want a gain share with each one of those 3. Is that cool? Are we cool with that? Should we have any issues with that? Sarah?
What are the operational costs of like doing it with 3 different ones as opposed to like the giant upstream one?
Good question. I think that's important. That's an important factor. Let's say we talk to Jesse, who has to send them all claims data, whatever, and they agree that, you know what, you don't. As far as operational, it's modest impact. We'll use the same claims feed, etc. You have to. In the analytics team, unfortunately, you guys have to do a little bit more reporting, but we deem it to be not a huge deal.
Does that include attribution?
Yeah. Let's say it's a modest pain, but it's not a real big deal because let's say, I don't know, Julie or Sarah House or Kit have developed a thing and they just can simply do it, use that different tin, and boom, it all runs and it's good.
Each systems include physicians and hospitals for each of these.
Yeah. So go ahead, Sarah.
Do we expect all 3 of them to pose the same amount of risk?
Pose the same number of risk.
So like maybe Ascension is like gonna collect upside 5%, but Trinity is gonna be downside like 2%.
It's all gain share. Let's say it's like you have an MLR target and they get 50% of the gain share. There's no downside. So let's walk through the basic process, which is first, which one has, so let's start with a simple question. For the Together Health deal that we currently have, which is just a gain share, is that positive expected value for us or negative expected value for us or neutral? Yeah, Cole.
It's a negative expected value for us.
People agree with Cole?
Depends on the deal structure. Back to your unit cost comment, if we got lower unit costs in the condition of this, I would say that's not correct, but if it's an added topic after unit cost, then it's negative expected.
Right. So we're agreed with that, right? And so we have, and it is because we may pay out, but we're never going to gain anything back, right? So any gain share like that has a negative expected value for us, okay? And that expected value is more the higher the probability of having to pay out, right? That makes sense? So now, which one has, so now we have that has a negative expected value, and we're trying to decide whether by signing these individual 3 ones, does that have more or less expected value than the first deal, right? And then we can layer on operational issues, etc. from there. Again, so same process of trying to figure out what's the expected value and then layer on operational considerations from there. Yeah? So now, which one has a higher probability of paying out? The 3 deals or the 1 deal?
Could we just establish we're talking about attributed membership?
You say yes. Phrase your question. Say it again.
What is the structure? How are we going to pay out these gain shares? Are they going to be on attributed membership for each system?
Yeah. such that, right, so you would pay, we would attribute people, instead of to THN, we'd attribute people to Ascension, to Trinity, and to University of Michigan separately. They'd each have their own population, and then we'd measure the MLR of that population individually, and we would pay, depending on each individual population, more or less.
They have the same rates under THN?
Yeah, let's assume that for now. Yeah.
So I think there are a couple conditions that this could be. So one is if you get them all on one shared system, our Oscar's exposure is to the market's actual MLR performance. If we assume we do attribution by each system properly, which we can still screw up, but if we do it properly, some systems might get paid where others don't. The gain share payment would be different in terms of who gets what proportion of that payout. But Oscar, if we do it right, should not have any, it should be a neutral effect, assuming the attribution is done right. And if we miss the gain share, you can see a model where Oscar is still paying out to one system, even though we've missed the market gain share. That's kind of, so I think there's like three states. There's, we pay even though we shouldn't pay anything, it's completely neutral, and then we pay the systems, we pay them differentially where we would have paid either way, and then I think it just comes down to how well we do that attribution methodology.
Josh, you agree?
Yes, I think the other thing I'm thinking through is like, do you have leverage when they say like we want 3 separate gain shares? Do you then have leverage to tweak your attribution methodology? In like the first case, like any member who touched any of the 3 systems is an attributed member, but now you have these 3 separate deals, and like in the intersection of these 3 circles, you can now say like these people don't touch any of you guys, and we're not gonna like you're only getting people squarely in the Ascension circle.
So I think if I summarize your view, it's mostly neutral as long as you don't screw something up on the attribution.
Correct. And then some of the systems will get different payments than they might have in the other game. So that it will be relationship non-neutral.
So who agrees with Kopko? Who disagrees with Kopko? Basil, what do you think?
I guess if you consider the 3 hospitals together, say Ascension knocks it out of the park, but then Michigan has a really high cost because we pay for veterinary care, for example. Altogether, I think that takes a flattening impact such that since it's only upside, you'll end up sort of, they'll neutralize each other out. However, if you have 3 separate systems, you'll still owe Ascension money because they knocked it out of the park. The other 2 don't have downside, so the net is that you pay out on the upside for Ascension if you take them separately versus in aggregate.
Kopko, what do you think?
I think it depends on where you set that gain share threshold. If you do it purely that way and everyone has the same target, you could see a case where Michigan gets paid out because, well, actually in their case they might not get paid out, the other 2 get paid out, right? Michigan's very expensive, all the expensive members go there. The other 2 are cheaper and they get the gain share. And Oscar therefore is potentially paying out to these 2 systems, even though the whole market, let's say we just hit whatever our target is, there is 2 payments out. So that world is possible unless we do attribution properly, which I still think you can get it to the right gain share as long as you set it properly for what it would look like if most of the expensive members go to Michigan.
Are we assuming the MLR targets and are the same across all 2 systems in this hypo, or?
Yeah, let's say they're 80, let's say they're 85. We can.
Is this the risk
Whatever.
adjusted
We can risk adjust the members such that they're.
So we're basically saying like either one gain share deal where it's like assume 85% MLR and then they reach out and they get like 75% of the upside for the single one, or it's 3 separate ones where for each one it's 85% MLR and then 75% upside or something like that.
Yep. So Cole, what do you think?
I think I think what Basil's saying is more or less right, which is if you were to take the 3, if you were to use the same gain share threshold, split across 3 systems, it's clearly better. The fact that some of them can be positive and some of them can be negative means you're going to pay out more when you're looking at 3 different agreements as opposed to one where you just average it. But I believe there are ways for us to construct the attribution such that we, with risk adjustment, we pay out more or less the market MLR in all cases, in which case we would be, I believe, neutral.
I'm excited on that.
But that's like I think the important point here is that when you take an option that goes against us and split it into 3 options, you are for the most part giving away value.
So risk adjustment doesn't take into account things. So it takes into account the sickness of your patient. It does not take into account catastrophic things like motorcycle accidents. We hit this in Los Angeles and stuff. So, and those tend to go to tertiary quad care, things like that. So you're still, risk adjustment does not solve for those high dollar cases that go to your AAMCs. You're still going to have those, and that'll still be a problem factor in this, and you'll still end up losing money.
So let me go for 1 second. So I want to just solidify. So let me do the basic thing just for mechanics. Make sure people get this, which is that let's say the THN deal was at an 85% MLR, okay, and that then there's Ascension, Trinity, Michigan, right, and let's say they each get 1/3 of the care to make life simple. And Ascension is at 85, this one's at 90, this one's at 80, right? Such that in aggregate, the aggregate market is 85, we don't pay anything out, we meet the target, but there's no gain share, right? Now, if we go one by one, don't pay anything, pay something, right? So this is clearly worse because the aggregate payment in this case is 0. Because there's no gain share. The aggregate payment here is like 1/3 of the care times 5% times whatever the gain share percentage is, which somebody who's better at math than me can say that's like a 5/6 point, I guess, something like that. But anyway, so you're paying out almost a full MLR point in this scenario, just because you split it apart. Just so do people get, this is an important point, which is anytime a gain share is just an option that has some probability of hurting us, and if we are splitting the thing into more options, the odds that one of them is going to hit, it's like buying multiple lottery tickets, like eventually one of the lottery tickets will hit, right? Yeah, Josh.
So I get the binary yes, no, are we going to pay money works against us in this situation? Like, let's say that first bucket was 84, so on an aggregate, we would have been less than 85% of the target. We're now paying out on a smaller population.
You are strictly, it doesn't matter.
There's no way to construct it such that you are better off.
Correct. Like you can go do the math offline, but for any number, any variability here hurts you. Is the basic idea, unless you don't make any payment, unless this is so bad that you aren't making any payment to anybody. But if you are making a payment, you are strictly at least as worse off you are at least as worse off with this versus this. And this is a material issue when we go, so I just want to, I'm going to talk about the implications of it. So anyway, the first thing is fracturing a market into multiple risk deals increases the odds that somebody will win on their gain share. That's the most important point. So the Basil's point is basically, I think, the most important one. A level down, you are particularly screwed if the way that this happens is non-random. But that doesn't mean you are particularly screwed, but you're screwed either way. So if you are particularly screwed if whatever Trinity, let's say, or probably you in Michigan, gets a lot of sick members in a way that you don't adjust for, and somebody else gets a lot of healthy members in a way that you don't adjust for, you are screwed even more because you're going to have more variability, and it's more likely that one will gain and one will lose, but you're not overall, but you are still screwed either way, even if there's no risk, even if you adjust for all the risk in this population, because there's randomness. And when you're writing these options to people, any variability is bad for you. Any risk is bad for you if you're giving out these options. There's more of it if you do not adjust for the population and all of the motorcyclist accidents go here and none of them go there. So we can do some things about taking the non-utilizers and attributing them. You can risk adjust the population. You can do a lot of things, which I won't go into all the details.
Now, I can answer a few questions if folks want, but that's the bigger thing is if you're going to do this, you better darn well get the risk adjustment right so you don't have all the coordinary care going there and one MLR is really high, one's really low. But even if you did that and all you had was randomness, you would still be worse off. Does that, do you hear what? Because that's a little different.
No, I think that's different than what I said. This still assumes that the behavioral impacts are zero.
Right. So then you can layer on. I just want to start. We start always when we do these things. We think about the financial impact, get like a dollar number to that, and then we can think about operational clinical impacts. So then, if you then had a compelling argument that said, well, actually, University of Michigan will be much more engaged as a partner because they have their own risk deal or something like that, then we could weigh how much do we value that versus this thing, and we have a tangible conversation. Is it worth $1 million for that or not, or whatever the thing is. And or if we're getting lower unit costs, how much lower unit costs are we getting, et cetera, et cetera. So the questions at that stage before I talk.
Just to add on to that, so we're talking more about how you can basically, based on risk adjustment and just like reaction, we talk about this. Just how would we actually do that? Your statement was just we can basically do some like math magic to basically redistribute the population so we can therefore come out net neutral for both options. How would we, outside of risk adjustment, how would we?
Well, you can do the if the variance in this scenario is driven by riskier people self-selecting to a given system, then you can adjust for that in your attribution model. You can't adjust for like the burn victim in LA who ends up in one system, and that if that totally screws your MLR.
Yeah, so you can take this pool of unattributed lives for people who don't get any care, which is a big component. What you can very fancy footwork do, which we are yet to get by a system, and we haven't really tried, but I doubt they'll take it. You can slice this up, and obviously the more these people you give to one system or another, the lower their MLR is. The more people who didn't get any care, the lower their MLR goes. And you can just slice this up such that you can give a little more to this person, a little less there, such that everybody ends up with exactly the market MLR, in which case you're not really even giving them an individual deal, you're really giving them a market deal, and you're just doing a lot of fancy math to confuse them.
But there is this difference between ex ante and like sort of post facto attribution. Like you could always, if you could do post facto attribution, you could literally just make it work such that they all got the same MLR.
Right.
If you have to do it ahead of time, then the only thing you can adjust for is the riskiness of the underlying population. Then things actually happen and they transpire and they could be worse or better than expected, and you're still exposed to sort of the lack of correlation between the different, what can happen in the different markets. Like the thing that you really want if you have these three different markets is for the risks to be 100% correlated. Because if the risks are 100% correlated, then your market MLR is the same as your MLR for all of the underlying systems. The more negatively correlated they are, the worse off you are because the more variance there is relative to the actual market MLR. Like literally what you have here is a bet on the correlation between the MLRs of the systems versus the MLR of the aggregate market.
Okay, so, and this is actually very relevant when we think about either evolving risk deals such as Sinai in New York or going into a new city. And we literally, it's something frankly I screwed up in that if you can get yourself into some really bad set of circumstances, particularly in the new market, but really any market, if you make this problem. Because just that, you can start to really have writing, this was one MLR point. You can have multiple, if you go into a market, you can have a 75 at one and a 95 at another, and you're writing yourself a 50% of, of a 10% thing, like many, many MLR points, and then having to explain that to Brian as to why he needs to write a $10 million check to somebody. So you have to be very careful in any market where we've got risk deals on an MLR basis, gain shares with two different systems,
without some sort of cap on how much you can be hit. So it's really something to keep in mind. Yeah.
So would this not be an issue if there was equal parts upside and downside?
What do you think?
I haven't thought it all through. My assumption is yes, because you would still get the average exposure. Like if that one guy was 90, you get that 5 points back, and the other guy was 80. 5 points, and you'd be covered both ways. But
Yeah. So you're no longer like right. Basically, if it's really symmetric, like 50-50 both ways, then you're fine. I mean, now you only have the issue of I got to go collect from the 90 because I'm going to pay out the 80, so you got to be darn sure you're getting the 90, and you have an accounts receivable issue in essence. But sort of from a pure math standpoint, you don't have an issue because you'll get it from one and be able to pay it to the other, theoretically. Yeah, basically.
That assumes a third of the care is evenly divided, right? So in the Michigan example, if the University of Michigan gets all the really high level, and there's a lot of downside exposure there, that could mess up the math, I guess.
You're still fine either way. If it's really 50-50 on both sides, you will. If all the dollars are going out to Michigan, you have to pay them the dollars. You'll get those dollars back from somebody else. But anyway, again, subject to your ability to do it. It's also a bit of a theoretical exercise because usually people aren't taking two-way downside in this sort of complex configuration. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why the systems would want to do a split deal versus a single deal in this situation?
Well, mostly people usually the systems want to get as narrow a deal as they possibly can because they want the unit of control. And what they don't quite realize is that the thing that will drive this deal is much more the randomness in the population and like random care patterns as to who has the burn unit and who's got the trauma unit. And they think it's all around who will, how well they'll manage the care and how well they'll be able to coordinate the primary care doctors and their specialists and all that. And so, thus, they're like, I don't want any non-primary care doctors that I don't control in my part of the risk deal. And so, this is a theoretical case because they've all agreed that THN will do this and will coordinate and do all these things, and that's what THN is supposed to do. Whether they do is a different story, so they've all agreed. But typically, systems are always fighting to get more narrow attribution, and we're always fighting for broader attribution because it's less risk for us.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that was the point of THN.
Well, that is the point of THN, is to gather these things, and also, to be clear, also provide negotiating leverage for those
But
prices.
it's just context.
Yeah.
THN should have a big advantage.
Correct, that's THN's job. This is hence the theoretical case. But I thought it was for. Okay? Next one, and then we'll wrap. We got 10 more minutes. Okay. Mount Sinai wants to do a risk deal where we measure 5 key outcomes, let's say risk adjustment, site of service, high cost drug utilization, and a couple others. In particular, we would measure last year as a baseline, and for any improvement in each metric, split the gain 50-50. Is this a deal we want to sign? Divya, what do you think?
I think we have a pretty good idea. We have last year as the baseline, we have a pretty good idea financially where the numbers would end up. So it might be more on how we want to complete our relationship with Sinai versus maybe like strictly around like the financial portion of it. If you want to like change behavior and give Sinai more skin.
Joey, New York, what do you think?
To Divya's point, I'm assuming that the baseline that we would compare to what there'd be other assumptions for this year that would take place to assume that the baseline is a good, like that we're not going to naturally improve like what we're doing on the other end. not to just say, oh, if we do better than last year's baseline, then the 50-50 is worth it, but seeing really where we came with some other assumptions baked in, like where we think the baseline will be in this year. So adding, I guess, some other inputs to just the utilization historically. But with that being said, if we can feel good about that data and think that we have a good baseline, not just historically, but everything else included, I don't see the negative, because it kind of sets a ceiling for us in terms of spend. But in terms of, that's kind of how I guess I'm thinking about it right now, in setting that baseline.
So let me ask a fine question. Let's assume that we go to the pop health team and all of our people and captain's team, wherever, and we say, you know, we're not actually doing much that's going to move the needle on whatever these metrics are.
Yeah.
Risk adjustment, site of service, high cost drug. There's nothing really we're doing that's going to move the needle. And we're just going to take last year's, which is, you know, decently large population, and just extend it out into the future, and then give them 50% of the upside. First question is, positive expected value for us, negative expected value, or neutral? Who thinks positive expected value for us? Who thinks negative expected value? Who thinks neutral? A lot of wishy-washy hands here.
If by splitting it, not having the full upside, is that considered negative? The fact that we'd be paying out half of our positive? I mean, we technically would still be the positive, right? But we're losing half of what we would have made.
Catherine, what do you think?
I just, about what you said before about we're not going to do anything to improve any of this stuff, I feel like if the population is the same and we're, you know, maybe it would incent Mount Sinai to do more. So perhaps there could be an opportunity to still gain if they're actually doing things that would improve these.
So let's break it down. Let's say Sinai did nothing. Like, we signed this thing and they ended up, like, filing it away, forgetting they did anything with it. Nothing changed as a result. Positive expected value, negative expected value, neutral.
Neutral.
Who says neutral? Who doesn't? Who disagrees with that? Cole, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, even if things happen randomly, we're still only paying out. We're not getting anything in. So any random improvement is a bad thing for us in this scenario.
Right. So that, like, if you drew, let's say you drew a line for each one of these things over a chart of how well they were doing, and let's say it's high cost drug utilization and then, you know, whatever, and we draw these line charts of each one, right? If sometimes you're going to get better, just randomly. Sometimes it's going to get worse. If you had to flip a coin, like, you wouldn't know whether these things were going to get better or worse next year. There is definitely some chance they will improve. Every metric that's out there, there's some chance it will just get better randomly. And it could also get better for lots of different reasons, whether we're doing something. Mount Sinai already had a program that was in place. The world is just getting better. People are learning. Who knows exactly why? But it could also just be random, like we flip a coin 1,000 times and we get 510 heads versus 490 heads and whatever, right? And in the case where we did better this year than last year, which will happen half of the time on every single metric, we pay out. Right? So for me, before, that's one thing I want to make sure, and it's actually the same reason as this, basically, which is gain shares, you just can lose, and there's a lot of randomness. And so just make sure when you're, again, the first thing is think through financially, is this, before anybody does anything, is this in my best interest? And then do I think people will do things, and what are the operational issues?
They're also randomly worse.
Yeah, but if they get worse, who?
It's like one-sided. We don't get any.
For any improvement in each metric, we split the gain 50-50. So, yeah, Divya.
Would we ever consider saying it needs to improve by like 10% of the highest it's ever been? And then the 50-50 kicks in? So
Sure, we could consider that. Although, again, that is also negative expected value. Just less so. Which could be fine. And so those are things that we can throw out.
but this is one where you have to again weigh what is like a good. What we would do on the analytics and strategy side is to think about how much does this thing reasonably vary over time, randomly, and if we give away half of that, what is that amount? And then, therefore, what do we think Sinai can move it of its own volition by signing this deal? And so if we sign this thing, will it, like, you know, if we thought this thing moves around like this every year, and then Sinai, and it's like this, and we believe Sinai can move it here, right? Paying this little tweaky little whatever, if it happens, is peanuts relative to the chance that Sinai can move it there, right? And so that's the thing that, as the account manager, strategy, like whatever, you have to begin to think of, like, how much do I really think I can move this thing? Because it's definitely, and how much randomness is there anyway? And it's the relationship between those two things that governs whether this is a good deal or not. Yeah.
I think the other piece is how much can they move it, and is Oscar actually estimating how much this will impact our MLR? Because we care about this thing because we care about how much it's going to impact MLR, and we have assumptions about what this can do, and that's why we're trying to incentivize these behaviors. So you have to believe that our assumptions that changing site of service is really going to impact MLR in the way that we want it to are accurate.
Agreed. Okay. So we had one more, but we're not going to get to it. I can send it out via email. Questions? Yeah.
This is just one broad question. How, in your experience over the past couple of years on these risk deals, how do health systems think of it the same way our team's been thinking about it? In your, at least from what you can tell in the conversations.
There's like I would say they are. My sense of it is a bit less rigorously, and a little more impressionistically, but sort of in line. Like that they know that a gain share is good for them, and that they're willing to do it. Any sort of downside they kind of don't want to do. But the gain share, but they don't quite precisely value the nature of what that gain share is, and so a little less precision and analytical and whatever, but sort of knowing what's in their best interest and not usually from a lot of experience, like having done a few of these. Some go, well, okay, I'm going to do the ones that kind of went well, not the ones that went poorly, that sort of thing.
Like, adding on to that, do we know how other payers are thinking about these?
No. I mean, like, for example, Stephen led this for Aetna in a lot of ways. So we've got, and we also hear from others about how they're doing it. I'd say mostly they think about it one of two ways. Either minimize it as much as possible, which is somewhat right, which is I don't want to do it only if I really, really need to. Or a little bit sure, let's go and let's figure it out. We'll start these joint ventures and we'll do these ACO deals and narrow network deals. Again, I don't know too much. The thing I don't know is how precise they are in terms of these types of calculations. Okay, is this helpful? Okay, all right. Thank you all. And again, I encourage you if none of these things felt really crisp to you, go through them again, take these, make sure you're fluid on this stuff and can discuss it.